Let's go. Well, g'day ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another weekly tutorial on our 2025 Chronological Bible-in-a-Year Reading Challenge. Say g'day to Reuben.
Hello everyone.
Hello, Reuben's our special guest this week, as I've mentioned before, trying every now and again to bring on someone who is doing this challenge week after week. And Reuben, I think one of the reasons I chose you is because you're in one of our community groups, WhatsApp.
Yes, that's
and
right.
I did a survey recently to say, hey, how are you guys tracking with your readings? And you're one of the ones in that group that are on track. Doing
Yes,
well? Doing well.
doing good.
Have you tried to read the Bible through before like this?
I have tried to read just by myself, just trying to go from the start to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I always get caught up at Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and I always just get stuck there. It gets repetitive and I just don't find it interesting.
You're one of them.
Yes.
Oh, a very, very common story. I think when we got to Leviticus, I said, just keep going, like so many people stop here. And fantastic. So you've read all the way through. You have read last week's readings. In fact, you read the whole of Deuteronomy. You snuck ahead a few chapters.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. How are you going about doing your readings? Which Bible are you reading? What time of the day you do? What's your routine like? How are you approaching your readings?
My readings at the moment consist of just waking up in the morning and just setting myself a half an hour block of just reading through as much as I can of the work that you've set for us. And yeah, just grinding through that.
Grinding through the work I've set. Right, great.
Yeah. And at the moment reading off both my paper Bible
Yep.
and electronic Bible on my phone. Starting off with the paper Bible at the start of the challenge. Mm-hmm. It was just easy. I didn't have a lot happening, and then uni got started, and so now I'm listening on my phone as I'm driving everywhere, trying to get to uni, to youth, whatever it is.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So do you know what's the name of the Bible app or the Bible program that you use? Do you know what it's called?
No.
Is it YouVersion?
Oh, yes. YouVersion Bible app.
Yeah, okay, that's pretty common. And just finished week 9, starting off Deuteronomy, the first 26 chapters. Although I think, like I said, you snuck ahead. What's been your takeaway for Deuteronomy?
Takeaway for Deuteronomy, probably just as God's talking through Moses to the Israelites, how there's like almost this blue and red pill, and how with the red pill, God's like, if you don't obey me, then you're just going to get curses, famines, all these bad things are going to happen to you. But on the other hand, if you take the blue pill and follow my commands, then you'll be prosperous, you'll have land, crops will grow, and just good things will happen. So that was kind of my takeaway from Deuteronomy.
That's a great way to put it. Just a nice little matrix presentation there as we close out the Torah. Yeah, and we find that especially this week, of course, as I said, you've read ahead, but particularly chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, where it really says, it lists a lot of the blessing and it lists a heck of a lot of the curses.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's part of the readings coming up this week, but I'm glad you finished it.
Yes.
Well done. Okay, everyone, thank you to Reuben. Let's get on. Well done, mate. Let's get on with week number 10 in our tutorial here. G'day, everyone. And thank you for joining me for, week 10's tutorial. We're going to be closing out the book of Deuteronomy, as Reuben's already done slightly ahead of us, heading over to Psalm 91, which apparently was written by Moses, so some tradition says, and then launching finally into the book of Joshua, where we get the heck out of this desert. Finally, we finish off with the life of Moses and make our way into the promised land. Okay, so much anticipated week as we really break free of where we've been for the last 9 weeks, I guess. Okay, here we go. A bit of an overview on the book of Deuteronomy. I'm not sure I quite mentioned this last week, but Deuteronomy is often broken up into 3 main sections or 3 main speeches of Moses. In the first one, chapters 1 through to 4, it's a lot of that historical recall, particularly from the last 40 years of their parents' and grandparents' generation that came out of Exodus, a lot of historical recall. The bulk of Deuteronomy, chapters 5 through to 26, is a lot of repeating of the law, including even the 10 Commandments themselves, and reiterating the importance of complete obedience to the covenant, complete obedience to every aspect of the law. Why? Because as Reuben just said, promised blessings will come, but also promised curses will come if the people of Israel disobeyed. And that is a particularly strong theme as we walk into the third segment of the book, Moses' final departing words through chapter 27 to 34, which unfortunately is probably the most depressing part of the book because of its focus on the covenant curses. And not only that, but this very, very firm prediction from Moses that you can basically take to the bank, Israel, that it's not a matter of if you disobey, but when. Moses, at the end of his life, is kind of a bit of a grumpy bum with the people of Israel, and is like, I know exactly what you're like. You're a warped and crooked generation. I know your hearts are inclined to turn away from God, and when I depart, you will depart from him. You will sin, you will rebel, and all these consequences are going to come upon you. So it does have a bit of a sort of depressing feel as we close out the life of a great leader, Moses, and finish up the Torah. But that being said, what you'll certainly notice is amidst all the doom and gloom, yes, there are promises of blessing. Even Deuteronomy 28, which is a key, if you obey, then you'll be blessed. If you disobey, then you'll be cursed chapter, Deuteronomy 28. The fact is, yes, there are some blessings promised. However, in that chapter, it's like a 20-80 or 80-20 split. 80% of that chapter is focused on the curses. It's like Moses' attention. He wants their attention, almost like putting the fear of God into them, so to speak. Moses wants their attention to be on the covenant curses, and it seems that's the way he closes out his ministry. But as I was about to say, with all the doom and gloom predictions, there are always hints of hope. And that's a very key theme that we see for future prophets of Israel. Not only was Moses their lawgiver and the founder of their legal system as a nation, but he was also Israel's great founding prophet. And what we'll see as we keep reading through the Bible, and especially when we reach the books of the prophets in the future, what we see is that Moses forms a foundation for their future ministry. Not only does Moses almost like like he provides the script that future prophets will read from as they denounce blessings, but mainly curses over God's people for their covenant disloyalty. So pay attention to these last few chapters of Deuteronomy. They're really important, and particularly I want you to give extra special attention to chapter 32. All right, bookmark it however you like, but pay special attention to chapter 32. Chapter 32 in Deuteronomy is another song of Moses. Now, we've already had a song of Moses right back at the start of his ministry during the crossing of the Red Sea in Exodus. I think it's chapter 14 or 15. It's a song that looks back to what God did when he brought us out of Egypt through the Red Sea, and it's a song of celebration. Well, Deuteronomy 32 at the end of Moses' ministry has a very different tone to it. All right, it's not as much looking back as it is looking forward into Israel's future, and it's largely a song of condemnation, where Moses, as I hinted at before, says, you will, when I leave, disobey, and all these curses will come upon you. This is what's going to happen to you, and I want you to know that I told you so. All right, I want you to teach this song to future generations so you will know you've got no one else to blame for your destruction and your demise but yourself and you alone. After all, this is the nature of the covenant that you chose to enter into Israel. Okay, so pay special attention to chapter 32. Also, because of the poetic nature of it, a lot of the themes and the language, the imagery, the metaphors that dramatize and bring home the point of what Moses is saying, a lot of those themes are repeated by prophets into the future, so pay attention to that. And one of the other things you'll notice that's kind of cute in that song in Deuteronomy 32 is, as poets and songwriters often do, they give their audience a nickname. And so this week we're going to see for the first time the emergence of the name Jeshurun. And you kind of read and think, who's Jeshurun, for goodness sake? Moses is talking to the Israelites and then he talks about Jeshurun. Well, Jeshurun is basically a poetic or prophetic nickname for the people of Israel. It's interesting because it means the blessed and upright one. While Moses is in one sense condemning them for their unrighteousness, he's also describing them as God's upright people. Okay, so maybe there's a message in that. But anyway, pay special attention to Deuteronomy 23. Moses shares this song with them, and basically then I think it'll be a great time to duck on over to Psalm 91. Now you might remember we did this a few weeks back with Psalm 90, which is accredited to Moses. Well, some Jewish tradition believes that Psalm 91 is also written by Moses. There's obviously a little bit of debate about that, but it's great to read in hand with Deuteronomy 32 because they do share quite a bit of common language, those two Psalms, but the focus of them is different. Whereas Deuteronomy 32 very much focuses on their promised destruction that's going to come into the future, Psalm 91 talks about the promised deliverance. Same God, same covenant, same language, just a different focus, and it's a bit of a warmer psalm to read after the depressing words from Deuteronomy 32. Anyway, that's about it. We close out Deuteronomy. Moses prophesies over each of the tribes except one. Keep your eye out for that and ask yourself why. Did he miss one of the tribes? You'll find out later on in the readings. He prophesies over the tribes. He goes up to a mountain. He dies as foretold, looking at the promised land that he himself will not enter. And there you go. We've reached the end of the Torah, the end of Moses' life, and finally hand over to Joshua as we prepare to enter the promised land finally. All right, here we go. Well, the book of Joshua, we're going to start this week, the first 19 chapters, and Joshua also can be divided up basically into 3 sections. All right, the first 12 chapters talk about Joshua leading God's people in where they basically go right through the middle of the promised land, divide and conquer, and for 7 years have successful military campaigns as a national army, okay, as they work their way through Canaan. That's the first 12 chapters. The second segment that we're also going to read this week details how the promised land was divided up among the tribes. Okay, and the third section we'll talk about next week. A few things to look out for, a few things that stood out to me as I did my readings this week that I'd like you to pay attention to and not let slip away from your readings this week. Firstly, one of the things I really noticed was a lot of the comparisons between Moses and Joshua as both men and in their ministry. And this kind of starts right at the beginning of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 5, where God says to Joshua, "As I was with Moses, so I will also be with you." And what we see is a number of echoes or similarities in Joshua's ministry that we saw in Moses. So Moses encountered God at a burning bush, was told to take off his sandals because where you stand is holy ground. Well, guess what? We see a very similar thing happen to Joshua this week. See if you can notice it. Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan, 2 of which bring back a good report. Well, Joshua also sends spies into Canaan, not 12, but only 2. I think he learned his lesson from Moses there. Moses leads God's people through the Red Sea. Well, Joshua leads God's people through the river. Both of them affirm the covenant. They demand obedience. They lead people in Passover. They read from the book of the law. They remind them of their history. These men have much of their leadership style is echoed. What we saw in Moses, we now see in Joshua. As I was with Moses, so now I'm also with you. Now, of course, they have their differences. They have very different upbringings. They've got different personalities that you'll probably see come through. And one of the other core differences, of course, is that they are leading in a very different epoch of time with God's people. And this really stood out to me, or really came home to me, when we get to the part where they enter the promised land. They have a meal together, a Passover meal, and it says after they had their first meal in the promised land, the manna from heaven stopped falling. That manna that had been with them for 40 years in the desert, it was all that they had ever known growing up as children and teenagers and young adults. That manna finished. God was saying, you'd now step foot in the promised land. A new era is over. All right, so you'll read that this week. And what you'll also not read, but something I thought of and did a bit of research into myself, is suddenly there is no more mention of the cloud that guarded them by day and the pillar of fire that guarded them at night. Suddenly, that manifestation of God's presence has also seemingly vanished. And I thought about this when I saw God's people walk through the River Jordan, and it wasn't, in the first story with Moses, how it was the pillar of fire and cloud that drowned the Egyptians or that blacked out the Egyptians so that they didn't know that God's people were crossing. Well, there's no mention of that presence in this story. Instead, they are following the presence of the Ark of the Covenant. That pillar has apparently disappeared. So there you go. We are now entering a very new era for God's people. But that's the first thing, similarities between Moses and Joshua. The other thing I notice is a couple of phrases that are repeated again and again. You'll find this: be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. You'll see that many times in this week's readings, both by Moses just before he dies, and by God to Joshua, and Joshua to the people, and the people to Joshua. They repeat this phrase to one another: be strong and courageous. I'm sure you'll notice that. And another little cute phrase that you might pick up is a simple phrase that says, and so it is to this day. Such and such would happen, and so it is there to this day. Rahab was saved from Jericho, and she still lives among us to this day. And it's just a nice little tie-in for a whole bunch of stories that happened at the start of Joshua, but it also shows the very near nature of the author, who was an eyewitness, it would seem, of these events and was writing it in their lifetime. In fact, many scholars believe that Joshua himself was the author responsible for writing this book. So it very much has that as it happened feel to it as we're reading along. And the last main thing, another thing we read this week, is the allocation of the land to the tribes. Now, if you've got a study Bible, if you're reading a paper Bible, what I'd suggest to you is turn to the back, because most paper Bibles, if they're worth their salt, have a map situation in the back, and there you should be able to see, look up the one that has Israel's tribal lands, the land of the 12 tribes in the land of Canaan. I think that'll help you. Most of the names of the towns and the boundaries and the rivers are quite foreign to us, but I find it really helpful to have a look at that and to see how the allocation of the lands were taken. You'll also notice what happened to Simeon. Okay, you'll see his plot of land there. And another thing that came up really helpful for me this week is when the Levites, or sorry, not just the Levites, but Aaron's sons, the priests, were allocated their towns. You remember how Levites, the tribe of Levi, won't be given in the promised land their own state, okay, their own region in the United States of Israel, okay, the Federation of Israel. They're not given their own state to manage, but they are delegated individual towns where they can live. Well, when it comes to Aaron's sons, there's this incredible coincidence that they all tend to be allocated towns in very close proximity to a city called Jerusalem. A city that in about 400 years' time will become very, very significant in the life of King David, not quite just yet, and a city that has its very first mention this week in the book of Joshua. So we're getting a prelude to something that is happening in the future. Why would the priests all be placed around that area? I wonder why. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's not do that yet, guys. Enjoy Deuteronomy this week as we finally enter the promised land. It's time to take the land. Finish off Deuteronomy, head over to Psalm 91, and we're into the book of Joshua. If you want some reading recommendations, check below, and I'll see you next week.